I'd like to call the October meeting of the Rules and City Government Committee to order. Please note for the record, Alderman Arnett is present and Alderman Chandler is not, with an approved absence, I believe. Not that we need them. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I move approval of the agenda.
And I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next item, approval of the minutes from the September 8th meeting.
I move approval of the minutes.
And I will second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, legislation before the committee. The first item is 04922, planning and zoning, parking and loading regulations. Parking fee in lieu of meeting off-street parking requirements for the purpose of authorizing a parking fee in lieu for certain businesses required to provide parking spaces and generally relating to off-street parking requirements. And Alderman Arnett, as one of the sponsors, would you like to walk us through this? And I see our director, Mr. Kubiak, here with us. You may come to the table so you can address any questions or concerns.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, before we get into the meat of the ordinance, I've had several what I feel to be productive meetings with planning and zoning staff and with Office of Law staff, and it is our conclusion that this ordinance really is beyond repair and really should be withdrawn and start over. However, one of the other co-sponsors has argued that maybe we can correct it through a big new omnibus amendment. One of the problems that the staff found is that the legislation doesn't really address many of the issues for outdoor dining. It's focused on Title 2166, which governs parking, and that is a big part of it, but Title 2164 is the part of the title that governs restaurants, in particular rooftop dining, which is one form of outdoor dining. And so I sent to you and other colleagues on the council some proposals for things that I think need to be in the ordinance and are not in the ordinance. I would like those things to be considered. And I have copies of those comments that I have in hard copy, but I sent it to everybody. But I'll run down that list just as a preamble before we get into 049, which is that I think all restaurants seeking outdoor dining must have their building permits reviewed by the planning staff for code compliance. That's the code, that's the law, and that's one of the things that we talked about with the staff, and they feel that we need to be explicit about that with regard to outdoor dining.
Alderman, may I interrupt you for a moment? Do we have the document you're referring to?
I brought 4 copies, and I can share that with you and Kaylin and the director.
May I ask, and maybe Mr. Lyles can weigh in, you know how I feel about legislation that has to be amended by its own sponsors many, many, many times, which sends a message to me that it's probably not ready to begin with. And I heard the alderman say that as one of the sponsors, he was interested in withdrawing this legislation and starting afresh. But there are 3, 1 sponsor, 2 co-sponsors. What does it take for someone to withdraw the legislation if he or she is one of the sponsors?
Because the legislation is already on the table for the council to consider, the council will have to vote to withdraw the legislation. Or anything else you want to do with it. Set it on the table, go back for a further review. I would concur, because of the complexity of what's being proposed, that it be withdrawn and the council initiate or indicate its direction for the whole process so that we can start afresh. But the council has to basically vote it down.
Alderman?
So I favor that. I have spoken with Alderwoman Tierney. She'd like to withdraw from the legislation altogether, but she certainly believes it should be withdrawn. If you remember the history of this, it was first offered as an amendment to another ordinance, 09, and it was deemed not properly constructed, didn't satisfy, help me, Mr. City Attorney, but it basically was undoing the ordinance itself by the amendment.
Right. At the time, it was trying to do something opposite what the other bill was trying to do, which made it a new bill. And so our suggestion was to craft it as a new thing. The issues relating to it being opposite the council's intent in the other bill still remain, however, and that's why we're in this kind of conundrum.
So and I do respect Alderman Savage, who is one of the co-sponsors with me. And I have a lot of constituents that are saying, get it done, and other colleagues on the council. But one of their concerns is if we start over, it has to be drafted, it has to go to the Planning Commission for review because it's Title 21, and then come back and go to the public hearing process. In my view, if the changes that I seek are agreed to, that is what should happen. It really should go back to the planning staff and the Planning Commission, have public hearing, public debate. The Planning Commission was lukewarm in its discussion of 049. They saw some problems. I don't think that people understand the complexity of this process. It's not just reviewing whether these capacity changes meet all of the city code, including grease traps and restrooms and so forth. Many of these restaurants have special exceptions. They would need to be amended. I speak to that in the changes that I'm fostering, but I really, really wanted to hear from the planning staff, specifically Mr. Smith and Ms. Rouse, because I wanted to know what would happen when we got into this whole special exception issue, and were there going to be things that we were going to be surprised by? And the answer was, to make it short, yes, there will be. And so you need to really think about it. And I try to address these in the bullet points, but I don't want to speak overly long, except frankly, I think it is better to retract, incorporate all the parts of the code that this restaurant permitting would have to affect, because 2164 is not addressed at all, and then go through the normal process. Now, there's a tail to this, though, which is restaurants now are doing outdoor dining on the continuing of the resolution that extends the emergency situation. And there's no way we can get new legislation drafted, go through the whole process, and approved in time for them to do next year's season. These restaurants start planning, acquiring staff and tents and tables and utensils and everything right at the beginning of the year. And I don't think there's any way with passing the legislation and then going through special exception and getting their liquor license changed, that we can have this legislation in place. If we do, then we don't need another resolution. If we don't, we will. So we should be aware. And there are people, some of my constituents, that are not happy with the continuing resolutions. And I'm not even going to ask the Office of Law for an opinion, but I bet we're on thin ice in terms of how much we're extending that that resolution. But we will have to figure out some temporary thing that we will do for outdoor dining if 049 is withdrawn and sent back to the drawing board for a new ordinance.
What happens if 049 passes without all of your changes, code changes?
Well,
It's like about
Two
10 of
things,
them.
three things. One, I'll withdraw myself as a co-sponsor. Two, I will vote against it. And three, I will ask for legislation that does all the things that planning and law have said that we need to do, new legislation. So if it passes, and it's in a really conflicting form now, if it passes as is, it will have in particular adverse effects on my ward. It will have some impacts on Ward 2. It will have relatively little impact on the rest of the wards. Downtown, the C and C1 or C1A districts don't have parking anyway, and they're under the sidewalk cafe legislation, so they would not be impacted. Restaurants in strip malls and so forth, where they're doing a shared parking regulation, will have their own thing to go through in negotiating with the office of the owners of the shopping center. But the real impact, I would assert, is in my ward, and it's much larger than restaurants. It has to do with the whole maritime activities that are going on in my ward, which are largely not going on in any other ward, a little bit in Ward 1. Anyway, I'm speaking overly long. My dentist told me this morning I have a small mouth, and I said, that's not what my council members say.
And believe it or not, he had a root canal today, and he's still talking a lot. I mean, you know. I am trying to garner what approach we should be taking.
Yes, well,
Because I just heard you speak to both sides of it.
my recommendation is that the legislation be withdrawn, which is consistent with the recommendations that I got from planning staff and the Office of Law. And I would make a motion to not support 049 from the Rules Committee, and I will make a motion, it'll be coming up on the second meeting in October, to withdraw the legislation, and that may or may not get votes, but this legislation is not going to be on the council meeting this Monday. It'll be on at the end of October. But I'm going to listen to the council, the staff professionals, and they're saying, step back, look at it. I now have these bullet points in the hands of the director, and I can send it electronically. But I'm trying to reflect what I think I heard from the staff.
I'm going to ask Mr., and I feel like I'm mispronouncing your name. I don't want to call you Chris, because I always use formal names in our meetings.
Okay.
Jakubiak.
Jakubiak.
Yeah, you've pronounced it right every time.
Okay, I did, thank you. Can you weigh in on, have you had an opportunity to evaluate this legislation? And given the concerns that Alderman Arnett has about the legislation,
Yeah.
could you give us some guidance from the planning perspective?
Sure. And first, thank you for inviting me up to the table to speak and to be here. And I was happy that I was able to come today. I was actually booked for a meeting with the mayor, but that was canceled. So I was able to be here. And I came in especially because I want to begin making it a regular practice. I want you to see me here because there are many code changes that I feel will be necessary in the years ahead, and I don't want to wait too much longer before bringing them to you and beginning that process of reviewing and critiquing them. Changes that would improve the efficiency of the review process and some oversight, transparency changes, and other issues that just make the code work better. That's what we're thinking. But anyway, on this matter, I've heard Ross's discussion today. I read the staff report from the Planning Commission and the staff, and I was struck by the fact that there seemed to be some issues, some lukewarm evaluation of the code change. My principal objective with this, among other things, would be to ensure that those funds that are paid as fees in lieu are somehow tied and reasonably used in the area where the impact's caused, because this is a regulation after all. So we have to make sure that the funds aren't used somewhere else in the city unrelated to. Now, there's some leeway and guidance that the city attorney, of course, has advised you on or would, but in order for me to recommend that, I need to be comfortable with the idea that the funds are going to be reinvested or invested in the areas where the impact of lost parking will be felt most. I'm perfectly happy and would actually encourage this committee to give us some time, give me some time to bring this to you in a way that I can firmly recommend it. So I'm not ready to recommend it today or give you a very warm endorsement of the section.
So, Alderman, you said there were two of you, one of whom is the primary sponsor.
Madam Chair.
Really does not.
Right, Alderwoman Tierney.
Alderwoman Tierney.
Madam Chair,
I'm sorry.
you have a second. You have a second you have a motion on the floor. It hasn't been seconded. So I would.
What's the motion?
The motion was not favorable from Councilmember Arnett.
Yeah, was that in the form of a motion? I'm sorry, and then
Yes.
I missed it.
Yes.
Yes, I did. I move that we vote unfavorably on 049 and recommend that it be withdrawn from the Rules Committee.
Okay,
I was just
is that
alerting you that
appropriate? Because I heard two different things.
I was just alerting you, because you have a motion, it needs a second so that the committee can engage in further discussion. I
Okay.
would caution you about engaging in discussion on a motion that hasn't been seconded, or let the motion die, and then you have to figure out what you're doing. But
I do apologize. I heard you, but I thought that was part of his discussion. I didn't
My
take it as a
yammering.
formal motion, but I will take it, and I hear two parts to that motion.
Yes.
One is that you will take no action, or you will oppose it, and that we should pursue new legislation.
Yes.
Is that what?
The specific motion was for the Rules Committee to recommend unfavorably on 049 and recommend that it be withdrawn.
And that it be withdrawn.
and so
Okay.
now that it needs a second,
And
or
I
it
will-
dies.
I will definitely second it. I got that.
Thank you.
Okay. And now discussion is appropriate at this
Yes.
time.
Right. So actually, Mr. Kubiak, in my bullet points about 4 or 5 down, I speak specifically to the Mobility Fund, and that was the subject of Alderman Savage's Amendment 7 or 7, I think it is 7, to the existing legislation. This is pursuant to the discussion on an earlier ordinance 09, which was withdrawn by its sponsor, but it was based on discussion and papers by Professor Shoup from, I think it's Southern California, recommending that there not be off-street parking provided, but recognizing that that puts pressure on the public parking space, and therefore there should be a fee charged to the restaurants that are no longer providing their off-street parking, and that fee should be applied directly to the impacted community. The mayor is actually doing something right now with the 10-minute trolley that is a focus on trying to provide some parking relief. But the Mobility Fund was not properly described. It was the funds would go into the Transportation Fund and get wherever the transportation director and staff think it should go, and we wanted it to be a separate thing, and we used specifically the term mobility, because I take Alderman Chandrameyer's point about auto-centric legislation. Mobility means more than automobiles. It means better sidewalks, it means better other transit options, it means bicycles, it means walking. So I'm glad that you're on top of that point.
Yes.
All right.
Further discussion on a motion to oppose
049 in this
049.
existing form. And I agree with you, Madam Chair. If an ordinance gets beyond one or two clarifying amendments, I don't think it's ready for prime time, and particularly when two of the sponsors are making the amendments, which I think indicates a lack of satisfaction themselves with the legislation.
Actually, all three of the sponsors have amended.
Well, that is-
So that speaks.
Yeah.
Okay, so all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And so at the meeting on Monday, it's not on the agenda for
It's
Monday.
not on the agenda, right?
So,
The
okay.
agenda is miraculously short.
Is there a mechanism for beginning the crafting of the new legislation immediately?
Yes. Cynthia Reuter of the Office of Law, and I did give committee members a copy of it, has already started a draft, and I have it here, which is starting to focus on 2164.
I think that will go a long way with our colleagues
It's very rudimentary, but
in opposing this, if they know that the new legislation is in the works already.
all right, and I'll just, wait a minute, Mr. Jakubiec, I have one more. In furtherance of that legislation, she did a side-by-side comparison of current restaurant rules and rooftop dining, and my direction is to make all outdoor dining rooftop and surface level consistent with each other. There may be some, I note in my bullet points that I gave you, there may be some minor adjustments, like 75 feet from residences. That would put a lot of my restaurants out of business.
Alderman, are the other two sponsors, the amendments of the other two sponsors going to be included in your new legislation?
Some of them will, some of them won't. Some of them conflict with other amendments, but the one that I'm most sympathetic to is the amendment by Alderman Savage that speaks to refining the mobility fund. The other thing that I've heard from the restaurants, and believe me, I've gotten a lot of input, is they don't have a problem with a fee in lieu necessarily, but they want to know the size of it. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a very profitable operation. I think that the fee in lieu should be of some significance for two reasons. One, I think now that the public is bearing more of the burden of parking, we should share in the profits. But two, that will make that mobility fund more fulsome more quickly. And that also is not discussed anywhere. So I'm proposing in my bullet points that I gave you that we simultaneously develop the fee resolution that would be attached to the new regulation. The attempt there is to let everybody have as much information as they need to decide. Restaurants may come and say, no, we don't like this legislation, and we want something else. So anyway.
That was going to be my recommendation, that there be a companion resolution.
All right,
That
I will
spoke
second
to-
that motion.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. Not sure you have that on the floor.
That wasn't a motion,
Okay, all
Mr. Lyles. That was a conversation.
But I wanted to take
Mr.
advantage of it.
Mr. Jakubiec?
So there are a couple ways of coming up with a fee. You could do it legislatively outside of the purview of the zoning ordinance, and I think you have more leeway there. But if it's embedded as an amendment to the zoning ordinance, that fee is going to have to be related somehow rationally to the cost of providing parking or some other impact related to that. So it's a little,
We're in luck.
oh, you got your own,
Mary Burkholder has already done some analysis.
perfect. That's
that
helpful
was
because I just imagined that being a work item for our office.
We're also
But
in
there
luck.
is going to have to be an amendment to the fee schedule
Right.
to
We're in luck
include it.
that Jackie Rouse has already done an enumeration of all of the restaurants and noted whether or not they have a special exception. So there's a lot of work that's in place that will backfill dealing with 2164. And so I think we can hit the ground running. And certainly your staff and the law staff are very familiar with these ordinances.
So Alderman, when this does get an airing on the full council, then you can speak to the significant changes that are
Yes.
going to come in the new legislation,
Right.
as well as the fee,
Right.
clearly delineating what that fee is. So,
I will be happy to do that.
okay, I think we can move on now to 01023. Thank you, Mr. Rukubia.
Thank you.
I'm not sure you're going to be leaving yet, but
Oh, yeah, there's short-term rentals. Well, that's Title 17. Let's see, do we have any other Title 21? No.
okay, that's
No,
it then.
we don't.
Sorry. So 01023, allowing cigar lounges to serve alcoholic beverages for the purpose of creating a definition of cigar lounge as a unique category of tobacco shop, and allowing cigar lounges to serve alcoholic beverages in conjunction with the consumption of premium cigars, pipe tobacco, and related products, and generally related to tobacco shops. Alderwoman Tierney, the mayor, and Brooke Schandelmeyer are sponsors in this legislation.
Alderman Tierney sent her regrets that she cannot be here to speak to this.
Did she share with you her, any justification or?
Only just nothing in terms of any official thing. I mean, other than, there's only, right now, only one place that this applies to.
Which is right on Main Street, correct?
You'll be happy to know I have no comments on this legislation. And I would be prepared to make a motion that we recommend favorably.
Okay, I'll second that. There is a fiscal impact note. It's $3,000 cost. Well, that's going to be the permitting fee.
Right.
Further discussion? Anyone wants to speak to it? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of 01023, receiving a favorable recommendation, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, 02823, city noise prohibitions and enforcement. For the purpose of updating the city code noise prohibition section by adding a ban on certain noise in residential areas, expanding enforcement, and generally related to noise prohibitions. And sponsors Tierney, Savage, and O'Neill.
And I'm going to ask to be added as a co-sponsor.
Okay, would you like to tell us why?
I would, but if I might, Madam Chair, first, a question to the city manager's office. I notice there's a legislative summary for this, but no staff report. Is it now the practice that legislative summary will substitute for staff report?
That is, I will take responsibility for there not being a staff.
Turn your mic on, your mic.
Thank you. Sorry. I will take responsibility for there not being a staff report. The impact of this particular legislation is going to end up affecting a couple of different departments. And so, to be honest, we're still working out a little bit how that would likely play out and what that does in terms of who has capacity. I think there's some questions. The initial thinking is that there are likely to be enough calls. There are enough changes and enough of especially around the leaf blowers and things like that, that actually is likely to have some amount of impact on the staffing. Planning and zoning, police, the question really ends up being, where does that end up sitting? Where does that excess end up getting absorbed? And to be honest, I like I said, I will take responsibility for that not being done. But that is something that I think is going to end up causing us to look at the protocols for some of those kind of calls about who gets what. And so that summary is, I am delinquent in sending to you, so I will take that.
So, Madam Chair, that fits nicely with, I have two major comments about this legislation, but enforcement is the number one issue. It's largely an issue with a lot of the legislation we pass, which oftentimes is reasonably good, not always, but if it's not enforced. And so there are some live examples of how these noise measures do not occur. I was told by Chief Jackson and other officers that they don't have decibel meters, so they cannot or do not measure the noise. And so that leads to the question of, well, who does? Because this is all predicated on noise levels. And I think this legislation indicates, in my surmise, that the responsibility for enforcement will fall in planning and zoning, the permits and enforcement staff. I really question whether they have the staff even to respond to calls, let alone go around and be monitoring potential noise situations. And I think there's a question if the enforcement staff responds to a call and the noise is loud, I don't know that they have the power to issue a citation. I don't think this legislation gives them that. It talks about a citation. It talks about repeat offenders getting a higher and higher fee. But I think this enforcement issue, which may well be something that gets decided on the administrative side of the house, but I think that is a big, big issue. I can stop here, but there is another big issue.
No, you may as well keep going.
All right, so the other issue is that, as was indicated, this is going to have a big impact specifically on gasoline-powered leaf blowers. And we all received a comment from one of the constituents, I believe in Ward 2, that she has a very large yard with lots of trees and leaves, and that gas-powered leaf blowers are the only tool that has the power to efficiently blow the leaves. I understand that, and maybe we can have some evolution of the leaf blowing power for non-gas powered. As we got an email that was put together by Jackie Giles talking about how other jurisdictions are eliminating these. But the big impact is not the constituent, although I recognize her plight. It's going to be on all of the yard maintenance companies. They're going to have to move to a different kind of equipment, which will also be presumably less powerful than gas-powered. Now, frankly, I think that's to the benefit of the workers. They're not having that horribly loud noise, and they're not having all of those exhaust fumes, so I think it's a good move. But what really underlies this point is the alderwoman from Ward 2 wants to have a delay in the implementation of the leaf blower subsection of this for until December 24th of, December 30th of 2024. I think that's way too long, but I do understand that there's going to need to be some time to allow people to adjust before we issue citations. So that's the other point that I wanted to speak to here. And I would propose an amendment that would say the legislation takes effect immediately, but citations will not be introduced for 6 months. So that's a specific amendment that I would be offering when the time comes up. The bigger issue is the enforcement issue, and I don't know how to address that.
So it doesn't speak to the enforcement issue.
No.
It does speak to, with the O'Neill amendment, the delaying of the onset of the legislation. So are you proposing that we change the date on that amendment from December 30th, 2024 to something sooner?
My preference would be that the legislation, and this will be a question for the Office of Law, the legislation takes effect immediately, but where this leaf blower thing, which is on page 2, that there be an amendment that citations will not be issued until 6 months after the implementation of the legislation. And I don't know if that's a legal construction or not, but if we wait 6 months or a year before it takes effect, there can be no citations. And not only that, how do we make people aware that this is a new code? I mean, my supposition is that we'll send some messages out, I guess, some way, but generally, people are going to be made aware when someone stops them and says, this is not legal equipment anymore. We won't issue a citation, but you've got to change.
Well, that's one piece of it, how we get the information out to the public about the change.
Nothing in here about that.
So you said you wanted to amend, so I'm sure you're on page 3 of the legislation, line
Right, and
8, 9.
This is where Alderwoman O'Neill offers, I'm not totally clear on her amendments because it seems like it does two
She's
different
simply
things.
adding the date.
Yeah, adding the date to C1,
Right.
which is specific to the leaf blowers. But then another part of her amendment talks about the changing the date that the legislation will take effect. And that's, again, December 30th of 2024. I'm trying to find her amendment. There it is. Well, maybe this is, Caitlin, is this the current amendment? I thought I saw in here where the effective date of the whole legislation, but if not,
Well, that's the last paragraph of the legislation. And she's adding, I don't know what, I'm confused between the red and the blue, Is the blue the new language? And so we adding this ordinance shall
well,
take effect upon adoption?
Yes, the blue would be the amending language
Okay.
to the changes to the code. The changes are in red. The blue is any amendments that came
thank
about
you.
after that.
thank you. I
That's
was
her
confused.
second one, right? And her first one is to add the date of December 30th, 2024
Right. And so-
for the gas-powered leaf blowers.
I have not had a chance to talk with the sponsors, and as I've indicated, I do want to add myself as a co-sponsor, but I do have a problem with this amendment because it's saying that the use of gasoline-powered leaf blowers in the residential districts within the city of Annapolis is permitted as of December 30th, 2024. I would rather that we be able to say something like it's permitted upon adoption, but citations, there'll be a 6-month grace period before citations will be issued. But again, turning to the Office of Law, I'm not sure if that's proper construction.
No. Basically, the enactment taking effect means that the penalties also take effect. So in order to get where you want to be, I would suggest putting the effective date in the future sometime. The tickets would not be issued, although you could also direct that certain publicity surrounding the ordinance be effectuated by the city manager prior to the effective date. So you don't have to do two things, you can do one.
Right. So let me ask you this. If I were to offer what I consider to be a friendly amendment to the amendment, it would be to change, say, for example, prohibited as of December 30th, 2024, change that date to prohibited as of May 2024?
You can have the date, whatever you decide as a committee, but the effective date means the enforcement date. When does enforcement begin? It begins on the date that you set. So technically at the last sentence or paragraph, this ordinance shall become effective on some date in the future, means that on that date enforcement begins.
So that says to me, if I'm understanding you correctly, that this amendment that adds the clause as of December 30th, 2024 is mute because the enactment date is upon passage.
Well, they conflict, and it's something we didn't catch. Technically, what should have happened is the date should have gone in the final paragraph of the ordinance. This ordinance shall become effective on certain date in the future, December 2024, December 1st, 2024.
But see, that means everything, all the rest of the stuff in the ordinance, I want, and I think the sponsors want to be enforced right now.
Right, and that's why I was looking it up just to make sure that we had those things covered. Because yes, you can segregate out for effectiveness those things that you want to happen in the future. So you can definitely put it in the sections, or you can put it at the end if you want it to encompass the whole entire bill.
Madam Chair, do you understand?
I'm looking at the O'Neill amendment page. It says page 4, lines 2 through 3, strike subsection C1 shall take effect 6 months after adoption, and all other sections of this ordinance as amended, etc., which
Right.
seems to contradict itself.
Right, so it wouldn't contradict itself, although her amendment is pushing the 6 months out. So basically, rather than put it in her section, her amendment, she should have changed the bottom paragraph so that C1 shall take effect on whatever date, I guess December 2024.
So how do we fix it?
Well, here, if you don't want the C1 to take effect 6 months after adoption, but December in accordance with her amendment, we could deal with that in the city council meeting. So in this motion here, you can state that you agree with her motion, and we will make sure that it's technically and legally sufficient when it comes before the council.
And that means it'll be 6 months from the time we pass it?
Or whatever date
By
you
the
set.
council.
If you want the leaf blower portion to be effectuated as she had indicated in her amendment, we will correct the bottom paragraph so that it doesn't say shall take effect 6 months after adoption. We will make sure that it says subsection C1 shall take effect on X date. And the other sections of this ordinance shall take effect upon adoption. That is proper.
Okay, so she's striking the 6-month thing.
And she's moving it out.
And she's only adding December 30th, 2024, 18 months out or somewhere around there. So that's what would be included in section 2 also, to match whatever that, the previous, I don't know what the number is on that.
Well, you have C1, which is about gas-powered leaf blowers.
Yeah, well, under C1 then.
And then the use of gas. So those would be prohibited as
Because
of
that
whatever
speaks
date.
to
Right, that's-
adoption. C2 speaks to taking effect upon adoption. Does it not?
No, it just speaks to the high-frequency sound.
Madam Chair, if I might interrupt, I think there's two very important issues here that need to be addressed. One is the enforcement question, and two is the structure of the amendment. I would like, if you are comfortable with this, I'm not making a motion now, but I'd like to make a motion that
You be
we
careful, because Mr. Lyles is
I
sitting
know.
right there. I'm just
This
saying.
is still discussion, that I think this needs to be postponed until two very important issues are reconciled. The enforcement issue, which I think is not really fully addressed here, but also is largely, I think, something I'd like to hear from the administration on. But I'd like to hear more than it's just going to go to permits and inspections. I'd really like to know, and this is why we need the staff impact report. I'd like to know if they really have the people that could enforce this if we had it all cleaned up. And my suspicion is they don't. In fact, my suspicion is they don't even have anyone focused on this because they have so many other things to focus on. And I'd like to know what the responsibilities are of public safety, police specifically, because that's who most people call. When there's a raucous party, they call the police. And they don't have decibel meters, and they're reticent to get involved. And I think that needs to be clarified internally at administration level, and maybe that would lead to some amendments to this. And then I do think we need clearer language. I do not understand Amendment 1. I understand the intent of it, and I largely agree with the intent of it, not the length of the implementation date, but the intent of it. But I think we need to go back to law and get a cleaner amendment.
Well, I mean, I agree, and maybe we can make a request of Ms. Buckland that there be a staffing impact statement attached to this. I know we just passed the legislation prior to, but I think it would be very helpful to know that.
Yeah, and that's, I've been trying to go ahead and include those as part of the staff report. And so that is actually part of the draft. That's not complete, but it is a good point.
Great, so.
I will make a motion that we recommend, that we postpone our consideration of this legislation until we get some clarifications from the city manager's office and the Office of Law.
And those clarifications relate to the timing of the implementation of the legislation, as well as the staffing impact.
Correct.
Get all that? Yeah. All right. I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Okay, 03223, short-term rental licenses and regulations. For the purpose of clarifying and limiting local eligibility requirements for a short-term rental operator's license, providing definitions, making technical corrections, and generally relating to a rental operator's license. Okay. Alderman Arnett, you're on this one also.
I am. You can't get rid of me. So I have several questions about the legislation as constructed, and I have some questions about the lengthy amendments that we just received. I'm very much in favor of the intent of this legislation, but I think there's some even specific things in terms of places that are referenced. So starting on page 2 for me, we're striking out the entirety of the existing legislation, which you and I were the authors of. And apparently, some of that comes back later on. So if you look at page 4 of the legislation, you'll see under license requirements number 2, that appears in black, which I'm assuming means that it is coming from the strikeout section. But I would like to see something that shows what came out of the strikeout and ended up someplace in the proposed change and what didn't come over. But I think there's some things that didn't come over that, and I can't point to them specifically right now, but that I don't want struck. So that's the first comment I have.
Could we stop right there, and may I ask Mr. Lyles, the print in black that's underlined is original language?
The print the print in black and underlined just means editing and reformatting. So the law isn't changed, just reformatted to make it clear. So the language, everything is still there. So for instance, in the previous iteration in the code, it was all one big block paragraph. In the editing, we reformatted so that it has its own section where issues are individual and distinct from other parts of the paragraph.
So
But the wording
can we
is the same.
crosswalk where that original language
Sure,
existed?
it's because you can see the strike through, that's what the original language was. So if you go, let me give you an example where you've got strike through, page 3 and 4. You look at how that language is set out there. 3 and 4 is struck through and then repeated and brought out by the black sections that are underlined. Same wording, just brought out into separate sub-paragraphs.
My sense is, but it's only a sense because it's so hard to crosswalk, that not everything in the strikeout came back to the proposed changes. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm not a fatal flaw for me, but it's very hard to trace these things. You really almost have to have 2 copies and strike out the original language in the one copy because you find it or some version of it in the new. So, this is just a complication of writing legislation, but for we who are part-time at this and but care about it, it's really hard to make that crosswalk. So,
Mr. Lyles, I don't know how you following this on your phone. We can't even follow it on our iPad.
Yeah, well, I kind of helped draft it, so I kind of know what's in it, and I have it here. I just pull it up and make it bigger.
Okay.
Basically, again, everything is there in the strikeout. we just reformatted into paragraphs and subparagraphs with headings. The red is what is the new sections that have been added by request of the sponsors, and then the blue sections would be what would be added by the amending sponsor.
So we have the strikeouts in black. We have the underlines in black. We have the red underline. We have the red bold underline. And we have the blue, which I haven't seen on this yet.
The red bold underline is still red, and underline, it just means that it's a section, it's a caption or a heading. It doesn't have any other legal effect other than.
Okay, so help me. Let's pick one example so I can find out where we are.
Sure.
On page 4 of the legislation, lines 12 and 13, which is a new 2, I assume, and it reads, "The licensee shall complete a city application which will be considered only after all questions are completed." Take me back to where that is in the original document.
Okay. You go back up to page 3.
Page 3?
That license requirement.
So you understand my concern?
Yeah, I do believe you're making our point. It's, as we clean up our code, this is going to happen.
Okay, so, yes, so,
More and
so
more.
that, yes, so that's licenses. So we go back up to 17, it goes back up to page 2, starting with line
That
3.
is in the original,
Starting where, sir?
that section.
Page 2, starting with line 3.
3. Well,
I'm
my
sorry,
line 3,
You're on page,
Oh, I'm sorry, hold on, oh,
did you say page 3?
yes,
Line,
I'm just trying to make sure, hold on. License requirements. Okay, so
you understand our confusion.
I do.
So how do we address this so that we're not confused?
Yes.
So that we can actually follow these changes?
Right. I probably need to give you the crosswalk sections, which is easy enough to do, and we can have that for you on Monday. Because Cynthia's out for the rest of the day, but it'll be easy enough to show. I can't show it here because, I don't have the access to the previous section.
I think this is too important to not have a clear understanding. And as the Alderman said, we worked on this for a long, long time,
right.
trying to get it right. We didn't think it was perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we need to be able to follow and see exactly what is being attempted here.
Right.
Alderman Arnett,
Oh, I have more.
oh, I know you do. But what is the long-term plan here? Are we going to give them all of the questions that we have and then
I think so, and
postpone until we get the answers to?
yeah, and the amendments that Alderman Savage has proposed and we just received before the meeting are substantial, and I think I like all of them, but I haven't really had the opportunity to integrate those into how they fit. First of all, the legislation as it comes off of iLegislate does not have the same line numbers. Every line is continuous through all pages. So what on page 5 would be of the, right now on page 5, I'm up already to a line 177. And yet on page 5 of the version that I got from, thankfully from Cablet, it has the line numbers that appear on each page. So when amendments refer to page numbers, line numbers on a particular page, you can't crosswalk it from what's on iLegislate. So that's, I don't know whether Kaylin can give us a technical reason why that happens, but so all of the amendments that we've gotten today from Alderman Savage, I can't crosswalk until I look at this new copy that I got. But that, just like the crosswalk from the old code to the new code, are more of a technical nature. I think there are some specific deficiencies in this legislation that I'd like to address at the committee. But I will yield to the wisdom of the chair.
I'm not sure. I won't comment.
There's not a lot of them. I don't have that many of them, but I think
Okay.
they're significant.
Well, I mean, then by all means, you know, go through them.
Yeah, so on page,
So we'll know what we're looking for.
on page 5, and I need to go to the new page 5 to make sure it's the same. Yeah, so, nope, on my page 5, under C, license restrictions, number 5, okay. Yeah, so on page 5, line 32 and 33, it refers to chapter 1740 of this title, which says the number of overnight occupants is subject to the limitations specified in chapter 1740. Well, I looked at chapter 1740, and it does not specify directly the number of occupants. What it tells you is the amount of room size or floor space you have to have for one occupant, and then how much additional floor space you would have to have for a second occupant, and then how much additional floor space you would have to have for a third occupant. I would argue that is totally unenforceable. I mean, that would mean that our staff, whoever's enforcing this, would have to go in with a tape measure and start measuring room sizes and doing a count of people. And so my preference would be that we specify, and I think this occurs elsewhere in code, that occupancy is in bedrooms and there can be no more than 2 occupants in a bedroom except for infants. I think that's how the language used to read. So I think this reference doesn't really give us something that's enforceable.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Mike Lyles, Office of Law. 1740 is in the original language, which is what we're trying to clean up, right? So we didn't change 17.40.
Well,
we left it in, but you are absolutely right, and we agree with you. We just need the authority to be able to make those specific changes. But if you go up to page 3, you'll see in the strikeout, 1740 is mentioned in several different paragraphs. I'll give you the lines. Line 14, line 21, where 17.4 is listed there. And so the language is the same, although in the red, we just break it out. But you see, when you see it broken out, you can see how easily you can point out the inconsistencies and lack of clarity, which is why we kind of try to reformat it so it becomes easier. So you're right, we can address the 17.4. We'd be happy to do that, and look for direction from the council or the committee to be able to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
what you pointed out was
Right.
easy to see because of the reformatting.
Yeah.
And we hope to be able to clarify if we are able to.
So I'm glad we agree, and I think we need to fix this, and when we get the fix, as a co-sponsor, I will offer amendments to fix that. But right now, I think it's unenforceable. If you go on to page 6, where it says the licensee of the dwelling unit or premise pursuant to short-term rental operator's license shall maintain records indicating all tenants' names, addresses, phone numbers, and so forth. And there's elsewhere in here saying that we get information from the resident agent. My question is, do we really get that information? I'd actually like to see that. Because when we're getting it, I think it's going to tell us a lot more about who's doing who's using these rental units, and this question will come up later on where we're talking about is tourist home. It's not just tourists that use these homes, but my question is, do we ever really see this data? And if we don't, should we? Or if we're not seeing it, why are we putting it in the ordinance? And so I think that's a really important issue in the legislation as drafted and not addressed in any amendment so far.
Alderman, I recall when we deliberately put that in the original legislation.
Right.
So that we could keep track of who's in our units, but we never determined who was actually going to gather that information
Well,
or what they would do with it once they gathered.
there's a story there, and when I saw this in the comp plan, and in the comp plan, it says this information is monitored by a company called Host Compliance. And in the original legislation, we were supposed to see an annual report from Host Compliance about the number of short-term rental units in the city. I saw a Host Compliance report for 2021, and I have not seen one since. I have asked specifically to see it. I have really no idea how many short-term rentals are purported to be in the city, and I have some questions about whether the method Host Compliance uses actually captures that information. And I do know that in our city and cities across the nation, there are concerns about short-term rentals driving out rental property, affordable housing, and other kinds of things, and a lot of jurisdictions are putting limits on short-term rentals, but we are operating, and this goes back to the old enforcement question, we're operating, we the council, without any information on the very legislation that we passed, and this is information that a maniac like me would actually peruse for our short-term rentals.
And did we have any information on Host Compliance during the budget process? Because if we're paying them to do this work, where are they in the planning and zoning budget?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, I've written a note to myself to do some follow-up on those questions.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, Alderman.
So the next point is still on page 6, or whatever the new format is. Let's see if it's on page 6. And it has to do with the property manager requirements. And again, this is a question, when the owner of the property does not live in the city, we're requiring them to have a resident manager and someone that would be available for contact and 24/7 when there's renters there. And later on, we require that, or maybe it's here, that they be a licensed business. and to do this. And once again, I don't think we need to see it on a real-time basis, but I do think it's something that we ought to get an annual report. Who are the licensed resident persons that are doing this compliance because the owner of the property is not a city resident? So, and then it says here specifically that the resident manager have a primary office located in the city of Annapolis at a commercial address and provide proof of occupancy. And I guess my question is, what is proof of occupancy?
Well, I was going to ask you about that entire number 2, the new number
Right.
2 there. We're going to require them, and I remember some of the women who do this kind of work, who I am sure work out of their homes as a small business, but we're requiring that they have a commercial address and have proof of occupancy. Is that occupancy of the business address, commercial address?
That's my assumption. But
I just
there's-
want to clarify, based on what I'm seeing here, lines 1 and 2 there are joined by an or, not an and, right? So
They are-
line 1 is
they are joined.
reside and provide
Right.
proof of residency or
Right.
primary
But
office.
interestingly enough, line 2 ends with and there is no and. Am I to assume that 3 and 4 are really supposed to be A and B as a subset of 2? And be available or have a designee available by telephone at all times? Is that a subset of 2? And the same thing for 4, be identified on any application required by section 1744.040 of this.
Yeah, that's not how I would read that. I would read that as you need to meet 1 or 2, and you need to meet 3, and you need to meet 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It confused me. I think they should be subsets of 2, but whatever. All right. Moving on to page 7 under cause for denial. All the requirements of this subtitle should be maintained throughout the license tenure. Failure should do so should result in the denial of an application. Again, I have a question of how is this recorded and monitored? Who's checking this? When you go down to B, small b, causing a verified nuisance, question is, who verifies nuisances? And whether we really need the word verified. And when you go to II, an adverse effect on the public safety and general welfare, what is that? It's very vague. What is it? Who determines that? An adverse effect, is that any adverse effect, minor or major, or is it a material or major adverse effect? So on this whole section, I think there's a lot of questions about what information is being collected, by whom, who's checking it, and then when we get into these issues of verification, I do feel that it's kind of vague, but I'm willing to, if we have specific staff that are designated to make those determinations, I'm willing to trust their professional judgment. Yes, sir.
These amendments in red came from your colleagues. They asked us to put them in the form, and we did that. So staff can assist in providing those answers, but I think they might be best asked of the sponsor, and the council then can decide who it wants to handle those items. We just wrote what we were asked to write, and we try to put it in a format that's easy to read, but it really starts with the sponsor. What did the sponsor intend, and then what does the council intend with respect to enforcement? What agency might be best? Is it the city manager, and let the city manager decide? That's probably how I read it when we put this together. So we didn't see it as necessarily illegal, legally insufficient, because there is a mechanism for enforcing the code. Starts with the city manager, who reports to you. And the city manager can then decide who best to do a thing. If the council has an idea of what department or how they want that department to effectuate enforcement, the discussion can start here with rules of government and make it either into the code or provide authority for certain regulations to be developed to get to the specifics of who and how.
Yeah,
I was thinking, kind of what Mr. Lyles just said. You know, this is our legislation. The three sponsors, I assume, did not get together and review the language that was drafted for them, for you guys. And maybe that needs to be a clearly delineated step in the process. Because that goes back to my statement earlier about us amending our own legislation.
right.
Did we actually, you know, did it really do what we wanted it to do when it was being drafted for?
Well, and so that's what I'd like to respond to the city manager, and I mean, city attorney. And I understand the tightrope here, but I feel our job is to be up at 10,000 feet and not specifically. And that's why we got into this whole issue of writing regulations rather than putting things in code. But if we're putting it in code, I would really like the Office of Law to advise me saying, a verified nuisance, what does that mean? And so I understand what you're asking for, Alderman or Alderwoman, but you're too vague here. And so my preference would be that the Office of Law's value added would be to tell us we're not being clear or that we're not legally constructed. I'll take another example. It was Ordinance 06, which had to do with affordable housing, workforce housing. And the Office of Law essentially advised that it was not legally constructed. I think this was 06, and withdrew. Well, I don't want you to withdraw. If we are doing legislation that is not legally constructed, I think we all need to be told that, not find out about it in a discovery process as we're having a debate over 06. I don't see that as interference from the Office of Law. I see that as helping us not put scrambled eggs and sausage into city code. And I think that's where you are headed with all of the reorganization, not in content so much, but just in clarity when you're doing this legislation. And I welcome that personally. But letting us do things, I think, that are as vague and ill-defined as this whole section is not a service, I think. We need more help than that. None of us, well, who do we have? Alderwoman Pendle Charles is an attorney, but the rest of us aren't. And we come and go. We're neophytes, and we're getting on the job training. It's the professionals, and this is an argument I'm going to be making when we get to discussion of the comp plan, who really ought to be taking our general notions and saying, Alderwoman, you've said you want this, and you've given us some ideas of how you want it, but we can't do that and be legally sufficient. Here's what we can do. when I was working as a professional economist and advising policy, and in fact advising the Clinton healthcare reform, they would say, well, we'd like to change the reform to say such and such and such and such, and we would say to them, we understand you want that, but we can't do the analysis for that, but here's what we can do. Here's how we can give you numerical support. And so I think that was our value added as staff, as we were telling the policymakers, there's no basis for what you want to do, but here's the thing that we can do. And so I think that's a collegial relationship that we really need to have with the Office of Law. And again, I will say personally, I would welcome what others might consider interference, but I consider helping me not look stupid. So, again, so that whole section, I think, is vague. I don't know whether Alderman Savage's new amendments, I think they probably do speak to some of that. Again, Madam Chair, I have just a couple more sections. This is on page 8, and it has to do with the definition of nuisance. And I really think there's some things that need to be better defined. So where nuisance means the following: an act or condition knowingly, how do we judge knowingly? Created, performed, or maintained on private property in a local thing. And then we get down to significantly affects the residents. Does that mean if we make a lot of noise at 10 o'clock, it's not significant, but we make it at 3, it is? I just don't know how to deal with that word. How do we define neighborhood? And then diminishes the value of the property. Who's calculating that? Are we going to have a realtor on staff and say, this place is dragging the neighborhood down by $200,000 a house? So, and then reasonable use of the property. So again, my whole concern there is the vagueness of this in our ability to enforce it. And I don't know whether we can make it more rigorous so that the enforcement people have something that they can specifically, but I do think we have to work on that.
Alderman, as one of the sponsors, let me ask, what's the intent of making these amendments to this section of the code? Is it to tighten the restrictions on short-term rentals? Is it to discourage participation in? Is it to give our staff more guidance as to their oversight? I'm just trying to understand what the purpose is.
I think that's an excellent question, and it takes us back to first principles. The initial intent of the legislation was to close loopholes that people were using to improperly own more than one short-term rental.
And we said they could only own one.
Right. That, however, has led, and I think correctly, the Office of Law to say there's more things that need to be in here, there's definitions that need to be added, and so forth. So I think you're right in pointing out that this is not dealing directly with the initial intent, but I do think these are changes that need to be defined to help our enforcement people actually do their job. You know, I think we have nuisance is a new definition being added here, and I think it should be in here, and I think that it would guide somebody on John Manessa's staff when they're called out to say, well, you know, this really is unacceptable, and I've got some language in the code that supports that this is a knowingly created nuisance that is significant and impacts the two houses on either side and the house across the street. And that this does not do that. And I think if I were the enforcement staff, I would say, what have you given me here? I don't really know what to do with this.
One thing that I think, just piece of context here, it is my understanding that the enforcement mechanism for the short-term rentals is complaint-driven. I don't believe we have enforcement officers who deliberately go and do proactive monitoring. I think that it's reactive monitoring.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're right, because I don't think we would have the staff to do that. I do know that I have constituents that are saying to me, oh, you're forcing me to be the person that rats out on a neighbor. But I don't know how else we can manage it. I mean, I think that the vast majority, probably 99% of all short-term rentals, and I use them in my own travels, are really sterling good properties that provide a service in the shared economy. And the ones that are not well maintained, pretty much they're the ones who are getting the calls, and maintenance people are going by and seeing they're not in good repair. They kind of crop up. And not only that, there's comments on the platforms that provide the access from previous users that say, the example I was given today, the toilet handle doesn't work to flush. And I don't know that we even have staff who have time to review these comments. So that would be a rich source of who's keeping things up and who's not. We have to balance this with all the other things we need staff to do. And again, that's the administration's job, and it starts at the city manager's office. But I do think that if we're going to write things, it really does need to be clear. And I have one last thing, and it's on page 9, where all of a sudden short-term rental means a residential dwelling unit serving as a temporary tourist home. That's the first time tourist home crops up in the legislation. I think it needs to be defined, but as again, what was pointed out to me is it's not just tourists that use this, it's businessmen, it's legislators, and so forth. So I wonder about the use of the word tourist. And even home, although I don't have a problem with it, so it's a temporary place to stay for no more than 90 days. So that was my last comment.
Alderman, what was and maybe Mr. Lyles can tell us, what's in our original language for the number of consecutive days? It wasn't 90 days.
It was 90. Yeah, and remember we got pushback because some of the legislators come in and stay in the term. They'll come in early before the 90-day term starts, and they'll stay after for some days. And so there was a complaint, I think it was actually from John Astle, about that, saying that that's not fair to legislators because they want to be here longer. And we decided that they're going to have to figure that out. Because most legislation, remember, we had the big search about how other people, 90-day length of stay seemed to be what would designate a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. But even there, I think we're inconsistent in code, because I think long-term rental is considered to be 6 months or more, or annual. And once an annual lease expires, they essentially go month to month. So, but we decided not to touch that.
I clearly remember the many municipalities that we looked at, and I thought it was far less consecutive days. And if I remember correctly, it spoke to for in the course of a year,
Yes.
and we don't speak to that.
No, we don't. So all of these things combined, and given that I want to look at the amendments that were developed by Alderman Savage after the Economic Matters meeting earlier this week, what I really want to say is I think we need some help from the Office of Law to make this more legally viable, and we need help from the administration to tell us how we're actually going to enforce. And Madam Chair, you just suggested that you might have an amendment or two of your own, like length of stay. I would recommend that we postpone action on this and that we ask for help from the Office of Law and from the City Manager's office about enforcement and legal sufficiency.
I will second that, but I will add that the sponsors will get together to determine the intent of this legislation.
What an idea.
I know, a novel idea.
I think the sponsors should get together before legislation is submitted.
I agree. Okay, so that's a motion that's been duly seconded. All in favor of postponing action on 3223 with the intended caveats, please say aye. Aye.
Did we make it clear enough? So we're not just postponing, we're postponing with some druthers.
For further, right.
All right.
Okay, R5123, and I'm sorry, we should have taken this up when we were
I
dealing
know.
with the ordinance. This is a resolution for the purpose of increasing the fine for repeat violations of the City of Annapolis noise restrictions and generally dealing with public peace and order section of the code. And I see there is one amendment from the sponsor herself.
Oh, do I have that?
That changes the fine from 100 to 200. I'm looking at the difference. Is it per day? Oh, she removes the per day. So first offense is $100, second offense is $200. And it doesn't specify whether it's per day. I'll entertain a motion.
I will, well, I will, Madam Chair, I did not see this, and I printed out everything from iLegislate yesterday evening, so I did not see this amendment, so I have obviously not had an opportunity to understand it. I don't understand what generally is $100 and noise is $200 for the second. What is the difference between, is generally a category?
Why would a day, per day, be removed in her amendment? Mr. Lyles, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, because it's redundant. The first violation is $100, and the next violation is $200. You don't need to say per day. Basically, we talked to her about it, and
Okay, so in the
it's per
original,
violation. And if the violations continue into the second day, if you will, it's $200.
okay, so in the original resolution, it says $100 per day. for first offense, and then just $200 for continuous violations. That's what I'm reading. It doesn't say per day.
Right, and we took per day out because it's not necessary. But
And
it accomplishes the same thing.
okay, so generally means nothing.
Well, generally is on page 3 of the ordinance, under public morals and welfare, and it says, generally a violation of any provision of this chapter is declared a municipal infraction. That's the old language. And the new language is noise violations. So there are two categories.
Well, we have removed from the original public peace and order violation, and that's been replaced with generally.
I'm not clear on where you're looking.
It's,
I'm looking at the first reader.
First reader, it says public peace and order violation, noise prohibition.
Correct.
And then her amendment takes out that phrase and just adds generally noise violation.
but
It does leave in public peace and order, but adds.
Generally noise prohibition.
Oh, I see. It's, okay, so that was part of, was that the problem, that it was originally in there and it was removed in the, because it's in red in the
Yes,
original.
it was in there originally as generally. We don't know
generally
why the
was
word generally was in there.
right.
But you got generally relating to public peace and order violation, and then you had noise prohibition, so we didn't change that. It just,
I'm not seeing generally in the original.
It's not. It's in red. So it just
it's
says
not
it was
even
a
there at
paragraph,
all.
a violation of any provision.
go
So
back to-
now what this legislation does is to create two categories to be fined. One is generally a violation of any provision of this chapter is declared a municipal infraction. And B is for noise, violations of the city noise ordinance, blah, blah, blah.
Well, that's not separated that way.
Pardon?
That's not delineated in here.
It is, yeah, in the amendment.
I'm looking at the amendment.
I am too.
you're trying to, well, yeah, the point of the amendment was to break out noise prohibition because you had this new code section dealing with noise.
Okay, so generally a noise ordinance, no, generally a public peace and order violation, and then,
Noise prohibition, which
A
is a
noise
secondary, which is
prohibition.
everything else related to noise. So if it's not noise, then it's everything else. And so the word generally is used.
okay, so is that what you're,
Well, so here's what I draw from the amendment is that we want to create a specific category for noise prohibition. But and for noise, the second violation, the fee jumps from $100 to $200, and I think every day thereafter. And that's all fine. I just,
okay.
I really don't understand creating two categories, but I'm good with it as long as it's legally sufficient from the Office of Law.
It is.
Okay. Then, Madam Chair, I would recommend the approval of amendment number 1 to the resolution, which is R 5123,
You want to recommend favorably,
favorably,
R 5123,
with amendment 1.
with amendment 1 as amended.
Right.
I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Look at who we made wait all this
Sorry,
time.
gentlemen. And now, R 5323, did we vote? We did vote, right?
Yeah, now we're on.
Oh, okay, sorry. R 5323, FY 2024 position classifications and pay plan update for the purpose of updating the fiscal year 2024 annual position classifications and pay plan to reflect the Management Information Technology Office name change in CA 223 and 01823, changing the Deputy Director Emergency Preparedness classification level from A14 to A17 and specifying an effective date. Okay. Ms. Hopkins, tell us what's going on here.
Well, that's pretty much what's going on here. So, Tricia Hopkins, Human Resources Manager. So with regard to the renaming of Management Information Technology Office, the legislation already has been before you to do that in the charter and in the code. However, this is the right place to change the title references. And so that's why they're there. That's because under Article 3, there's a requirement that it go by via resolution, that when we make changes to titles and grades, it appears in the position summary before you to effectuate that change. So that's why that is there. The Deputy Director position is recommended for the grade change from an A14 to A17. We are still in the midst of the classification, citywide classification and compensation study. So this is a preliminary recommendation based on the interviews that were conducted with all of the directors and all the deputy second level positions in city government. And primarily because our payrolls that are in our rules and regulations don't allow for any change until we get it officially before you and adopted, and we are not finished with the full integration of the compensation work that's being done by the consultants, as well as any recommendations that would come in terms of structure. They want us to move forward because our payrolls don't allow us to do anything with compensation until we've enacted a change. And it's no reason to wait longer. We're going to do multiple things through the class and comp study, including addressing the way our payrolls are written. So they are, as part of their charge, looking at comparable jurisdictions for what do they do, what's the amount of increase that they're giving when individuals are promoted or reclassified, what's an effective date if it's taking longer to get something accomplished than you want it to take, and also pay equity in general. And so that is a broad task for that consultant group to do. So they highly recommend, and the city manager supported, to go forward and change the grade at this time, at this level. So we don't know what's going to happen in terms of the pay recommendations fully, but we do know that this is a supported step in the interim for sure. And that's why we're going forward with it.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I support this resolution. I'll make a motion that we recommend favorably, but I do have some questions about, as you said, the effective date, because we created this deputy position in 2019, 4 years ago. And so I think I look forward to the class and comp and what the right grade is. We know we have other deputy positions that are higher, but I also understand, being an advocate of digging into classification stuff, that there's a lot of factors that go into that. But
So could I just offer some correction?
okay,
This
please.
position was not created in 2019. This position has been in place for, gosh, I don't know the creation date, but that as part of the fire department.
Oh, no, I
This
remember
position
well.
has been in place.
Mr. Posey and can't remember the other gentleman's name. But
Yeah, I know there was a point, and it's probably just that it predates me in all likelihood, but the position maybe once upon a time was contractual and then created, but it was definitely the deputy level when it was a member of the fire department.
Right, there were two retired fire department employees who are contract employees.
Yeah.
I think, Alderman, you're referring to when we made the department a department.
Correct. And office.
He had a deputy in that department prior to it being created a full-fledged department. But surely from that time forward, it was acknowledged, recognized that there was a deputy in that department. And I remember well when Mr. Posey was there, because I
Yeah.
worked hard to
What was the
raise his
other-
salary.
Sherwood or, no?
Pardon me?
Al
Al Posey, but who was the other gentleman?
I don't know.
Sherlock,
who took
yeah.
it before
Right.
Director
Oh,
Simmons.
of the former fire chief, Ed Sherwood?
Yeah,
Right. Yes.
Okay.
right.
Yeah, we're going back to the dark ages, but I just think you were referring to when
I'm
we
referring-
made it a department,
Yeah.
it was very
Yes.
clear.
And I'm not trying to make that point to say that it's something not to quibble over, really, but I'm just saying that the position and the title were there when it was a member of the fire department, when that function was clearly integrated in the fire department. So anyway, we're moving forward at a pretty fast clip with a class and comp study. We absolutely are. They have an entire team that's doing all of the benchmarking and pay data. So the all of the positions, all that were part of the first wave, we'll call it, which is all the director level positions and all of the second level positions, are benchmarked as well, which means every one of them, they're soliciting comparable pay information from the established, from the identified organizations that we're comparing ourselves to. And so I had asked before when I came to Finance Committee, I hope it made its way to you, I had a really detailed summary
Oh, I'd like to see
page. Did you get that?
it. I did not, and I'd like to see it.
Okay.
But it's in the finance folder, and all I have is RCG folder.
Okay, yes, would you make,
So
No, I
we've
don't
also
think we
conducted
do
the
right
town
now.
halls, and the town halls are on the city's intranet, part of the website as well. So what that page is that I provided to the Finance Committee and asked for distribution to all council members is essentially taking the information in the town hall and loading it into a very small typed, but very detailed summary page. And so on that, you'll see all of our comparables, you'll see what jurisdictions we're comparing ourselves to. They describe their methodology, they describe their timeline, they have all that detail in there, which I hope will be helpful to you. If it's not, feel free to reach out to me and I'll try to get the answers to
It
questions
sounds
that you
much
have.
more robust than the last two efforts. That's all.
Well, I'm really very pleased with these consultants as well, because they have taken on some greater integration of some of our needs. And what they did initially in talking to the individuals I just mentioned at the first wave, they took what we have initially is kind of a summary of the interviews. And so they asked some questions around, where do you think our problems are? Where do you think our compensation challenges are? What are your retention and recruitment challenges? So they could take that kind of information and inform what they're going to seek, or I'm assuming they're doing this independently, seeking for information from other jurisdictions, and then come back to us and make some real recommendations. We have individuals that are part of the consulting group that have a lot of public experience under their belts and are bringing that to bear too. It's helpful to us because sometimes you tend to live in your own silo. It's hadn't been changed forever, so you don't change it. Well, you have some outside group come in and take a look at things and say, that's not really working for you, is it? And so we don't really have language here in the city that allows us to fix things that look out of sorts. We don't have a mechanism in our language to address that. And so we're going to end up with that. We will be given information that we'll evaluate at the management level. The city manager will clearly evaluate as well, and it will influence what we even have in our rules and regulation environment here.
Okay. Madam Chair, can I ask that we go off the record for just a minute?
yeah, is it still on the same subject, or?
Yes.
I think, can we do that? Can we?
I
Is it
think
something that's pertinent to this discussion, or can it wait? Sorry. Okay. You have to go for 3 seconds and we're back. Okay. You know, I'm very pleased that this is finally coming before us. I know we were promised that this would come before us in the spring, in the May timeframe, and but it's here now. I am still very interested in meeting with the organization. I
Okay.
know my schedule did not allow it during the summer.
Yes.
But I would really appreciate having an opportunity to meet with the team.
They're very interested in that as well.
Okay.
I think what we want to try and figure out is, because I really don't think it's appropriate to do as a public meeting. I think it's important that we have those interactions in a way that we can ensure that we have the opportunity to speak openly, but that it's really, we're in the preliminary stage, so it's really not a reporting. It's important that we just have an opportunity to explain through the consultant directly what their methodology is and what kind of work they're doing.
What's the projected timeline for this completion?
So they have a pretty tight timeline. Their expectation is to have, they are touching all job descriptions, so they have 200 plus job descriptions to affect, review, change. They need to be ahead of collective bargaining and ahead of budget, so they need to be done by the end of this calendar year.
I didn't hear that. When?
By the end of this
collective
calendar-
bargaining is supposed to start this month.
Well,
So-
that's not their economics, so we want to be ahead of the economics discussions. Yeah.
So we're talking about this fall, this winter, that,
Yes, yes.
okay. I have heard from some of our lower level employees that no one's ever talked to them.
Because they, as it was explained in the town hall, and
Well, everybody, I assume, wasn't at the town hall. Did we have
well,
600
it's
people?
been published now, and everybody's received an email notification that it's available on the city's employees-only access. Both recordings of the town halls are there. And so is frequently asked questions listing. If somebody was not able to attend that, they can go back and watch the recording and get that information.
Will they have an opportunity to ask questions and be interviewed still?
So there are, as part of the information that's probably on that sheet as well, they have gone through and determined focus groups based on input from the city, as well as looking at where the numbers of employees are. And so there are designated set focus groups that I'm now getting represented employees to sit down with them, sit down with the consultants so they give them feedback. Included in that, already listed on there, inspectors will be directly interviewed. Other focus groups are equipment operators, public works maintenance workers. So there are people at all levels of employment that are part of those focus groups. And then they have interviews for particular positions that have a lot of varied responsibility, and it's more challenging to get a better idea of what their positions entail. And so they've identified them as well. And of course, the benchmarking that's there for the purposes of getting comparison information from other jurisdictions is built into it as well.
Do those who are on the part of the focus groups have to be recommended by a supervisor or someone in a higher capacity?
Through the town hall, what was encouraged is to be talking to their supervisors. And so we are trying to coordinate that so that the information, or so that the individuals chosen are good representatives of their groups and articulate and able to speak to what it is they do in their jobs.
Okay, I think I can see how some people might be left out, who are hesitant about going to their supervisors.
Just tell them to talk to me. If they're coming to you, tell them to come to me.
Okay. I just want to make sure that it is as inclusive as it can possibly be.
Yeah.
I heard you say, the directors, the next level. I'm talking about the grunt workers in the city.
And
who
I
don't feel that they have a voice.
Yeah.
And no one's talking to them. And sometimes supervisors do, and sometimes they don't. And so HR, I hope, has a mechanism for reaching those people who don't feel they have a voice for whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'd be definitely interested in a one-on-one or however they want to set it up. But going back to now the two things that are in this legislation. One is the MIT renaming, which is a given. We had all agreed to that early on. But with the deputy in OEM, that position, as Alderman Arnett pointed out, has been a deputy for a long time. And when that department became a department in 2019, that position was there, but there was no discussion about salary. So we're talking 4 years now of a salary deficit, as far as I see it, where that needs to be rectified. So is there going to be a recommendation from this group as to how we fix this problem?
For back pay.
For back pay, yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
So the recommendation will be around changing our pay rules, which we will need to change our pay rules to create an ability to do so.
I don't know.
So
what
they
that
will
means.
they will make those recommendations. I can't tell you right now specifically related to this single position, but you want to make sure that you have pay rules that allow you to deal with pay equity concerns, which they have identified in this situation.
Well, I know you understand my concern.
I do.
We've been having this discussion for a year now, and I would like for them to be aware, just like when they were hired in the spring, I think you told them that we needed some resolution by spring. That didn't happen. But likewise, they need to be told that we need a recommendation from them. And maybe we don't need a recommendation. Maybe we can make some assumptions of our own. But we should have them weigh in on the right thing for us to do to fix that problem.
And they are willing to do so. And I'm trying to show you that we're soliciting information so that we can do so in a rule manner that we then agree is necessary to change in our city rules and regulations so that we are addressing not just this situation, but any situation that occurs in that regard. And we are also, as part of the study, we are incorporating an equity index review. So they have our demographic data, they have information from the city, that I've put together to evaluate from a pay equity assessment as well.
Okay, good to know. One more thing, and then I'll come. I know I'm out of order as the chair taking all this time.
No.
Rules and regs. We don't have any rules and regs. The last
We
copy,
tried.
we did, but the last official rules and regs that I saw were 30 years old.
Right.
So I hope that they are not using those rules and regs. They don't even include females in those guidelines from 30 years
When
ago.
everything's written in he.
And it was typewriter print,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing.
So
So I hope we're not using those rules and regulations
Well, we have
as
to.
our guideline.
We don't have a choice. We do follow the law that is over and above what are written in our rules and regulations. So we're not violating federal, state, or any other form of legal reference. But we have dusted that off. We've talked extensively about formatting across city government.
There's a thought.
That seemed to be, if you recall, a lot of our conversation was around that when we came to Rules Committee in 2015 or whatever year that was.
So it's even before that, because Alderwoman Hoyle and I think it was resolution R5209, trying to clean up the rules and regs, and it started with Kimler, and then went to Paul Renstead, and of course, Classy and I had experience as federal bureaucrats with those rules and regs, and I think the resolution finally Sonny died, but yeah, I mean, it's nobody's fault, but it really does need to be updated.
We couldn't agree with you more, honestly.
Right.
And it's,
I wanted to come back to the other point that you were making, Alderwoman. If I'm reading the civil service thing and I'm looking at this, and it does seem to me that this is a recognition that the position, the deputy position, should have been at least an A17 all along. And so if that is a proper interpretation on my part, and I'm looking at the financial impact, which is when we make this correction now, it has a $7,700 fiscal impact once we approve this at the council. But it does seem to me that there's a gap from 2019 up to date where this was not properly classified.
so that goes right back to the discussion and conversation around our payrolls only allowing us to enact the change after this resolution would be effective dated.
But that's
So we
not
have
the-
no possibility for back pay for anybody.
Not under our current payrolls.
What current pay rules? I mean, where can we find the payroll rules that say that we cannot pay, especially when
It doesn't
there's...
say you cannot pay, it says when you can pay. So the legal interpretation is once the resolution is effective and effective dated, that's when the actions of anything in the format of the resolution are in fact effective. Under the city's rules and regulations, it is section 4, under classification and pay provisions. That's where the result of a reclassification under 4-3 talks about when an employee is reclassified, what dates you use.
But that doesn't speak to the, I don't think it's speaking to the issue that we're talking about, which is the fact that there was an error made.
It doesn't speak to that because there's no other provision that gives us the ability to backdate that. And so again, back to the date of the resolution, I don't know, you look
Yeah,
like you want to open your mouth, so.
Obviously, all of this way before my time, but it is my understanding that this is part of why there is such a commitment to see through the class and comp study and to revise the pay rules to ensure that we have mechanisms in place in order to do things like that. The interpretation that it is my understanding that the interpretation is, as Tricia indicated, in essence, that authority has not been granted under the existing pay rules. So it talks about moving forward, but you can't reach into the past, which is why there is a commitment to see the class and comp study through.
So
I understand what you're saying, and I understand, or at least I feel, that this is an excuse to cover up something that we did that we should rectify. Okay, I know we need a comp and class study. Absolutely we do. We're in the midst of it. But in the meantime, I think we have a responsibility to address a problem that was created. And going forward, we'll have things in place. But I think we would be out of line to not attempt to right an error that was made, an oversight. Partially our fault because we didn't bring it up, partially HR's fault because they didn't bring it up, and partially anybody else, Mr. Malinoff, who was aware of it, the alderwoman who's the public safety chair who was aware of it 2 years ago. We're all at fault, but that doesn't mean that the employee should have to feel the brunt of something that was done and, so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about fixing something. Going forward, hopefully we're gonna have everything in place and this will not happen again. But it has happened now and we have to fix it. And I've been saying that for a year now.
So,
Alderman.
Madam Chair, I totally agree with you. I understand that our staff have to operate within the constraints. I'm not sure that other interpretations couldn't be made, but what I will say is I'm very happy with these changes. I'm happy that we're moving forward, and I'll certainly make a motion to recommend that we recommend favorably, but I will also say I'm not satisfied with this resolution, and maybe it's something that we have to go to the Finance Committee with and some kind of a resolution to do something out of the mainstream, but we need to talk about that and probably get our ducks in the row before we go public with anything.
I'm thinking we could amend this legislation to speak to retroactive pay.
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know.
Yeah, I understand that it's in the rules and regs,
But that doesn't.
which is not part of this resolution.
That doesn't preclude us.
I don't know. I think that's unfortunately,
City attorney.
City Attorney
question.
Lyles isn't here right now. I don't know if that's, it sounds like a legal question to me.
Is this on the agenda for Monday? No.
We have
This
time.
agenda is on Monday's agenda.
Oh, it's not on for Monday's agenda?
I don't believe so.
We were
No,
just
it's
waiting
not
for
on the
rules
agenda. I
to
looked it up
happen
a few minutes
before.
ago.
Let's see, regular meeting.
It's not, it's only a couple of things that are
Yeah,
on.
it's very little
agenda.
second reader. Truxton Park boat trailer, that's important.
And
the
elect-
military
military boats, yeah.
parade.
So it's not.
So I guess what I want to do is let's get this done. If we can come up with something to do between now and, this will probably be on the the second meeting, whatever that is. I can't add 9 and 23rd. But the sense from these two council members is we're happy to make this fix, but we are not clear that it's sufficient, but we need to understand what it is we can do about it.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation with the city manager and the city attorney. But as far as what you're doing, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. We're charging ahead.
Okay, good.
So Alderman, would you make a motion that we give or you want to postpone R53? Or the other option is to give it a favorable recommendation with the potential for amending it?
That would
And
be
not-
my, I don't want to do anything to stop this. We've
Yeah,
been working
yeah.
so long to get it. I'd like to do a favorable recommendation and then it can get on the agenda.
Even if you postpone it, it will be on the first meeting of November because rules meet before the first meeting. in
So it'll come
November.
back to us in
Yes,
November.
if you postpone it, it'll be
I-
back on your agenda.
I'm loath to postpone it after all this time, but I do think we have some time between now and the meeting
So we can revisit it
You can,
at our next meeting. If we come up with an amendment,
yeah.
we can revisit,
If it goes to the 23rd, you'd have to request it back here. But if you postpone it, it'll already be here, and then it goes to the first meeting in November, which is the next. Your meeting is Friday, the meeting is in November.
right.
May I make one point?
Yes.
I really, really, really don't want to affect pay for someone. We have, if we act on this and it's effective prior to the 14th of November, then a step increase can also be realized on the anniversary date, which is a further increase in pay on top of the reclassification amount. That's about almost 12% in pay changes pretty quickly, thankfully. But I really hope you don't get past that date so that we can in fact also provide an increase.
What date did you say? February?
14th
14th of November.
November.
The 14th of November is an anniversary date. Okay, so that's a target, absolutely. So we would have to, the meeting would be the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th of November.
The first meeting in November is the 6th,
Not for us, but
Our
the
meeting.
council.
the council meeting.
Yeah,
the
so
9th.
the rules meeting, no, it can't be the 6th. That's not the
Oh, no, it's
second Monday.
the second
Monday.
If it's the second Monday, then
Yeah, so rules will meet again before
the
that
rules meets.
first meeting in November.
Okay,
So let's,
so,
Yeah, I apologize, it's the 13th.
Rules is on the 30th, is that what I'm hearing?
Rules is on the 3rd.
right.
3rd of
Council
November.
is on the
Right.
13th.
So let's get to the
that would give
base
us
camp.
one day, yeah, yeah.
I mean, my sense is let's recommend favorably get it on the agenda for the 23rd. That hill will have been climbed. And then at the Rules Committee, by then, we'll get more information from the administration about what we can do about back pay. I mean, I think it is making a strong statement if we issue, and we recommend postponement, but geez, we've worked so hard to get here.
Well, so your motion would be what?
That we recommend favorably on the resolution, and then I'm not sure exactly how to word it, but that the council will continue to look at both the rules and regulations and other processes that would allow us to consider back pay.
I'm not good with that.
Okay. I'm going to follow your lead.
I want us to make it clear that we want to consider the option of back pay as part of this
All right.
effort. And if we have an opportunity, we meet again, you're saying it could be on the agenda for the 23rd?
It could, if you recommend it favorably right now, this is gonna go October 23rd, or October 23rd's agenda. If you postpone it, then this will come back to you on the 3rd of November, and then go to council on the 13th of November. The anniversary is on the 14th.
That's so tight. Sorry.
It is very-
It is tight, but you know what? We shouldn't be here at all, and this is the frustrating part for me.
All right.
And
So you want a motion to recommend postponing?
well, really, I would like a motion that would give a favorable recommendation with the potential of us coming up with an amendment
Okay,
that would address back pay.
there's nothing that, I don't think you cannot bring your amendment to October 23rd, and then everybody vote on the amendment. If you get what I'm saying, like you can bring your amendment to October 23rd.
What other committees is this going before,
This is
other than
rules and
finance? And it's,
It's done, it's going back to council afterwards for, finance.
so what do you think? I know you don't want to delay it. I don't want to delay it either. But I don't want to, the anniversary date is, well, maybe it's a 12% pay raise. But how much is the pay raise that's already been lost?
Well, somewhere
know,
around $7,000
seven-
by 4.
That's incorrect. The civil service board has to take this 74.
No, they've already met. They're done, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we're talking, what, 5 or 6% a year for each step? And maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But we're talking, what, 4 years, 5 years out?
4 years times $6,000 or $7,000. So that's a chunk of change.
Yeah. So are you comfortable with that motion with, if we can get an amendment together? I'd like for it to come out as the potential for an amendment for the full council.
So, re-say it again, please?
That we give it a favorable recommendation with the expectation that there be an amendment that addresses back pay.
An amendment by whom?
Us,
By the rules or by the
the
council?
rules.
If it's,
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
rules.
it can't be a rules committee unless y'all vote on it today.
Well, we don't have it today.
A finalizing or Arnett amendment.
Okay, well, I'll offer that amendment.
It could be an amendment.
Okay.
It has to be one of you guys because it didn't happen.
So we recommend
Okay, it could be
approval
both
with
of
an
us then, right?
amendment.
Okay,
Recommend approval with an amendment to consider how we can
to address back pay.
address back pay.
We just voting on the, recommending this favorably, the amendment, you guys don't have to.
But I want it spoken in our amendment here, that we will seek out
So
an
we need
amendment.
we need an amendment that recommends that the Rules Committee
The members.
consider or determine how we can do back pay.
I don't want to determine how to do it, because that can already be determined. HR can figure that out in a few minutes. But what I'm saying is, I want us to give it a favorable recommendation with the expectation that we will, in an amendment, address paying back pay.
If that's the motion, I will second it. I'm comfortable with that because I want to get this approved.
I agree, so do I. I mean, we've been laboring over this for too long. So,
Okay,
okay.
all in favor?
All in favor? Oh, yeah, that's my job, isn't it? Please say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
All right.
thank you for all of your work, and I look forward to a date when I can meet with the organization who's doing the comp class study. Have they met with all the aldermen?
Pardon me?
Have they met with the aldermen?
No. Are we on the record now? I think we are. So we had an employee town hall. Alderwoman Findell Charles came to one of
Tricia's
them,
mic is
Your mic isn't on?
I thought we were finished.
Okay.
Oh, we haven't adjourned yet.
So we had employee town halls. Alderwoman Pindell Charles did come to one of those, but no other alderpersons. I don't know if anybody joined the town hall remotely, because a lot of people did join that way. So I can't answer your question individually. I really only knew who was attending by, who was sitting in the room in front of me, because we did it a hybrid method. But again, those recordings are available for any of you to see, but if you're asking for an interaction with the consultants, they're poised to do so. We just have talked through around having that be, a gathering of all members, because that's not really the goal. We could set it up otherwise, and we'll reach out and try to do so.
Okay, I appreciate that. I've been interested since this all started, so. All right,
Okay.
Are the regs you're citing online? So we can go?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you go to the city's website, Departments, Human Resources, the rules and regs are right there.
I need to look at it. It's been a long time.
Yeah, but we do absolutely want to move forward. We've talked about reformatting. I know that part of Vicky's role here is that we have something that's got some uniformity across the city. My goal, personal goal, for this to work better for us is to set it up in such a way that it's not the rules and regs, it's this section and that section and this section, so that we can be way more responsive and turn around when there's a need for change and there's a need for dealing with elements of the rules instead of the way it's a full body of work right now. And that clearly in 2015 didn't get us where we wanted to go in that review. And any place afterwards that would do that in a more robust way.
Well, that's good. We've been,
Yeah.
this is the third one we've lived through, or the fourth one we've lived through.
Lived through.
Yeah.
Survived.
Yeah, lived through. So, because, it becomes a foundation. And, when there's, well, I'll just leave it at that.
It's a body of work.
So, all
Okay.
right. Thank you very much.
Oh,
I
you're
appreciate
welcome.
it. Do we have anything else on our agenda?
No, but the amendment, I wanted to stay. So it has to be, you vote to strike or add. If I'm not,
No,
like within here. Okay,
no.
okay.
Well, we're adding that. We're not striking anything.
So
We're adding.
somebody in this sort of amendment.
Should we adjourn and then we can talk about how we do this? Yep. Okay, sir, I'll entertain a
I
motion.
move we adjourn.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Forgot to vote. Thank you, everybody.